Hello and welcome to the GCSE Biology tutorial. This is for topic B5, Homeostasis and Response, and is part 3, so covers hormones in human reproduction. We'll be looking at the menstrual cycle, sex hormones and fertility. The rest of this topic can be found in other tutorials. So, first thing to remember is what do we mean by puberty? Now, puberty triggers the release of sex hormones. And the two groups of sex hormones are those produced by a male, which is mainly testosterone, which is released by the testes, and that triggers the production of sperm. Females produce the hormones estrogen and progesterone, and they're produced from the ovaries. And they also produce two other hormones from the pituitary gland in the brain, and they're called LH and FSH. And we'll look at those later on and how they work. But these hormones are important in the menstrual cycle and fertility. So what is the menstrual cycle? This cycle is roughly 28 days, and it's what happens inside the female in terms of the uterus lining or the lining of the womb, and starts with day 1 to 4. So day 1 to 4 would be menstruation or a period. And if we look on this graph here, you can see this is the thickness of the uterus wall. So during a period, the thickness of the uterus wall declines because it's breaking down, and it comes out of the female, out through the vagina as a period. And that lasts roughly 1 to 4 days. Sometimes it can be a bit longer. After 4 days, the uterus lining will start to build up again. And the reason it's building up its thickness is it's getting ready for a fertilised egg, if an egg is going to be fertilised. Day 14, this is a really important day in the menstrual cycle. On day 14, a mature egg comes out of one of the ovaries, and that is called ovulation. And then days 14 to 28, the uterus lining is maintained, which means it's kept quite thick in case an egg is fertilised and it implants into that wall. If no fertilised egg is implanted, then the lining starts to break down again. Here you can see it breaking down, and a new period starts and the cycle starts again. So this constant cycle is called the menstrual cycle, and it's controlled by different hormones. You can see the levels of these here. So let's look at those hormones in a bit more detail. So FSH, stands for follicle stimulating hormone. A follicle is what an egg comes out of inside an ovary. And they have to be a particular size, they have to be mature enough for an egg to come out. So, at the start of the menstrual cycle, FSH is produced by the pituitary gland in the brain, and that causes an egg in the ovary to mature. And as it's starting to mature, it also triggers or stimulates another hormone to be made by the ovaries, and this hormone is estrogen. And estrogen then causes the lining of the uterus to thicken and also triggers the next hormone, which is LH. It also inhibits, which means stops, the release of FSH. So if we just look back at this graph, you can see here the uterus wall is starting to build up as there is more estrogen building up, and now also FSH is going to stop. So the egg is all going towards when the egg is going to be released. So then at day 14, luteinizing hormone, which is LH, produced by the pituitary gland, is released, and that causes ovulation. So that causes that mature egg to then come out of the ovary. And normally in a cycle, one egg will come out of one ovary every month. Now, the leftover follicle that's just released an egg causes the next hormone to be made, which is progesterone, and that's produced by the ovaries. And this maintains the thickness of the uterus lining, which means it keeps the uterus lining thick. And that's in case the egg that's just come out gets fertilised by sperm during sexual intercourse and gets implanted into the uterus wall. So the wall will be thick, the lining will be thick for the egg to implant in. Now, if it doesn't implant or there is no fertilised egg, the progesterone levels then fall and that lining starts to break down. This then triggers the release of FSH, and another egg starts to mature in the ovary, and the whole cycle starts again. So you can see the levels of the hormones changing in conjunction with the lining of the uterus. And this is one of the reasons that people may, who are trying to have a baby, trying to get pregnant, would have sexual intercourse around day 14, because that is when mature egg is being released from the ovary. So it's the ideal time for sperm to join with that egg and then implant in the wall. Okay, so because of these hormones, we can actually use these hormones to prevent pregnancy. So they can be used in contraceptives. The most common is called the combined contraceptive pill. Now, this pill contains estrogen and progesterone, hence it's called combined. And the estrogen actually prevents the egg ovulating from the ovaries because it stops the production of FSH. So no mature eggs are made. So you shouldn't really ovulate if you're taking the pill. The progesterone also in the pill causes the mucus in the cervix, which is a muscle below the uterus, causes the mucus to thicken, and so that prevents some of the sperm getting through to the egg. The combined pill is about 99% effective if taken every day, but it does have some side effects like nausea, and it doesn't prevent the transmission of sexually transmitted infections like chlamydia. You can also get the same hormones inside a patch, which is called a contraceptive patch, which lasts a couple of weeks, and you can stick it on your arm. You can have an implant. This is when you actually have something implanted into your arm, and that gives a constant dose of progesterone, and that just means you don't have to take a tablet every day. So it stops any eggs being released, and it stops implantation. It can last up to a few years. You can also have progesterone injections, and you can have an intrauterine device, which is called an IUD, where it's put into the uterus. And this device kills sperm, prevents eggs implanting into the uterus lining, and it also releases a hormone called progesterone, which thickens the mucus again. Other contraceptive methods that aren't to do with hormones are condoms, so they prevent the sperm reaching the eggs, and they also stop the transmission of STIs. Females can also have a diaphragm, and that fits over the cervix and forms a barrier. Spermicide is often used with a diaphragm, and that's a lubricant that kills sperm. Sterilisation, that's when the male or female will have an operation where their oviducts or the sperm duct is actually cut or tied, so the sperm isn't released or the eggs don't travel to the uterus. Sometimes people use a natural method where they time in the cycle when is the best time for fertilisation not to occur, although this is not very reliable because the female cycle is unpredictable at times. And the other way, of course, is abstinence, which means no sexual intercourse at all. Now, in the same way hormones can be used to prevent pregnancy, they can actually be used to increase fertility. And they are used widely to help people get pregnant. You can take fertility drugs, for example, Clomid, and they contain that hormone FSH and LH, and that means that you would make more than one egg. So you might have a few eggs being released that are mature when you ovulate, and that increases the chances of getting pregnant, although it can lead to multiple births like triplets and twins, which can carry a risk. There's also a method called IVF, or in vitro fertilization, and that's when the female is given these drugs, fertility drugs, so they produce lots of eggs, and then the eggs are collected during a procedure. These eggs are then fertilized with sperm out of the body in a lab under a microscope. This can also be done with a procedure called ICSI, and that's when the sperm is actually injected directly into the egg. When the eggs are fertilised, they're then left for 3 to 5 days, so they actually turn into a ball of cells called an embryo. And then when they're this stage, they can be transferred back into the uterus. Now, the issue is, again, IVF can lead to multiple births, like the twins and triplets. It's also probably got about 20 to 30% success rate, so there's a lot of emotional, physical stress, and it doesn't always work. It can be expensive, and it can lead to overstimulation of the ovaries. So the ovaries end up making lots of eggs, and that can be damaging. However, the biggest thing about it is it helps so many couples who are infertile have a child. Nowadays, IVF has improved even more because they've got ICSI, so the actual sperm is injected into the egg. You can test embryos for genetic disorders, and also time-lapse imaging of embryos, so they can actually watch the embryos as they're growing and pick the best one to put back into the female. Some people are against genetic testing as they view it as unethical because to know that there's a genetic problem with an embryo and then destroy it, some people view as unethical. So here's some key questions if you pause the tutorial now and have a go at answering these for 10 minutes. Okay, so what happens on day 14? Ovulation. That is when a mature egg is released from the ovaries. Number 2, what hormones are produced by the ovaries? Well, one is estrogen, and that builds up the uterus lining and also triggers the release of LH from the pituitary gland. Progesterone is also made from the ovaries, and that maintains the lining, which means keeps it thick. When those levels start to fall, it then triggers the release of FSH, and it also causes a period. What causes the production of progesterone? If you remember, it's that leftover follicle inside the ovary that releases an egg. That's actually called a corpus luteum. That leftover follicle triggers progesterone to be made from the ovaries. What are the concerns of IVF? Well, it can cause emotional and physical stress. It can result in multiple births, which carry a higher risk of miscarriage. It can be expensive, and some people think genetic testing of embryos is unethical. So in summary, we've covered these 3 topics: the menstrual cycle, sex hormones, and fertility. If you look at the next tutorial, we'll cover the rest of this topic. Thank you.